But it is my unique pleasure tonight to have in studio for the first time Republican candidate for the United States Senate. Of course, he is Bobby, the Rep Nardolillo, joining me in studio. Bobby, welcome to the coalition.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for coming on. Accessibility of a politician in today's troubled times is critical. There are so many that hide behind the PR flack, the press release, the show where, and there are a few out there, believe it or not, where if in fact they're calling in, they get to pick and choose the questions. That isn't the practice here at the coalition. We want to have a conversation though. Let me establish some rules of the coalition because Bobby is the first declared candidate to appear since our migration to what I call Coalition 2.0 here at Go Local Prov. The first rule of the coalition is we do not handicap elections. We don't talk about percentages, we don't talk about polls. I'm not interested, quite frankly, if you're going to win. I want to know why you should. We don't talk about fundraising here. I'm not interested in how many millions of dollars of out-of-state money, hint, hint, Governor Raimondo's, Senator Whitehouse, how many millions of dollars of out-of-state money that you're able to procure based on commitments you may or may not make and may or may not be in the best interest of Rhode Island everywhere. I simply want to know how you feel about the issues, and I will let the voters decide. I ask a few questions. We let the candidates talk. This will never be one of those shows where, yes, you do have an egotistical host, but the egotistical host is not here to overwhelm the audience with his continued version of his own personal wisdom. There's enough of that out there, believe me. So, let's get right down to it. Originally, I was going to focus exclusively on national issues, but this has been a hell of a week here in Little Rhodey.
It sure has.
All right, so let's get some of the basics down. 38 Stadium. What was your initial reaction when you heard the proposal? They call it the ask, I call it the grab. What were your thoughts?
Sure. This is the second time down the same road, as you know that, and the first time I came out in strong opposition. We're in a regrowing, rebuilding for our state, and every time we take one step forward, we're giving subsidies back, 3 steps back. So as you could see, we're over $100 million upside down. At the beginning of the conversation, we were in good shape, and there would be money back, and we're talking about free college. I'm sure you're going to bring that up, and many different things. And now we're looking at funding, and there's a lot of different opinions about funding the Pawtucket Red Sox. I've taken my children there before. It's a historic spot in Pawtucket. It's an enjoyable evening and an affordable evening. And I think that the owners, being very well off, can afford to fend for their own investment. I don't think that should be on the back of any taxpayer, especially seeing, as I said, we're trying to rebuild. We're trying to have a stronger focus on pushing our state forward, getting us out of the red, becoming more business friendly, growing a robust economy. We're talking about giving more money in silly spaces, but taxing the individuals who live in the state to provide it seems like they want to invest and create this. They just don't want to gamble on a loss and put the loss on us.
What's the term? Privatizing success and socializing failure. Coventry is an interesting town because you've got it's one of the most diverse mixes of neighborhoods, you will, in a town. You've got downtown Coventry, which has got the feel of a small city. You've got some very rural areas. You've got some very suburban areas. You do have manufacturing. You've got a strong base of local businesses there. How do you think local businesses feel about taxpayers being forced to subsidize their competition?
I'm going to be very honest with you about Coventry. When we look at Coventry, I love where I live and represent to the best of my ability, but my frustration actually is when we're looking, as you said, businesses throughout the town. I'm looking at a lot of empty storefronts, and that's because of the red tape and, of course, the minimum corporate tax right off the bat.
Yeah.
I've been fighting since I've been, a small business guy.
Right.
And that's my philosophy, was to relieve some of the burdens for those dreamers, for those people who want a storefront, like we see downtown and throughout the towns, to start up a business. We're seeing these donut shops go up like wildfire, and we're seeing all these unique things that someone has a dream, but right away the state is kneecapping them. Right away, there's taxation. There's already give us before you can create your dream. And I see that through my town. There's many storefronts that say vacancy, where I would prefer seeing grand opening. And that was the fight, and that's what I'm talking to you about. Is that we need to love and respect what we have here. What we're doing is we're buying jobs from out of state, and then the ones that are businesses that are here are suffering. I mean, we need tax relief here. We do. We have to look at, we have a huge, fat budget. It's huge. And to go through it, I mean, just look at our commerce, what we pay for our commerce. They're not creating anything but aggravation to local businesses, because every time they go to do something, it's a press release for, as we discussed before, your dear friend Governor Raimondo, it's a press release to put her agenda of popularity forward. And these are not functional, successful things for Rhode Island, and it's frustrating. That is frustrating. So as you said, local businesses looking at this are very, very frustrated.
We were met with the news from one media source today that we actually lost jobs this month. We lost a few hundred jobs. And this despite spending literally millions of dollars in corporate giveaways. Now, here's the not so subtle irony. You're a Republican, I'm a Libertarian. There are those that would picture you and I as being in love with the notion of giving money to companies. You know, that's one of the popular cliches that we both have to fight all the time. Yet, we're pointing out the injustice, the fundamental injustice between picking winners and losers based on personal connections and or the ability to spin a story into some sort of, I don't know, hyperventilated version of economic growth that seems to only exist in her mind. It's exhausting after a while.
It is exhausting, but not to the point of Vistaprint. That's the most recent insult. Right. To businesses here, and more especially print work businesses. These print work businesses, let's say 50, 60 years in business, haven't received any relief at all throughout this whole process, and because they're highly competitive, as you know, they're working on a very, very small profit margin. And for Vistaprint to be recognized in the way, I'll use recognized, in a way that they were for 100 jobs. We're talking, and there's countless printers that I can think of. It's an insult to them. They've been here foundationally, and these are cornerstone family businesses that are here in Rhode Island that are trying to survive and continue from one generation to another. And I use that terminology, being kneecapped. You're being kneecapped by the one individual who should be the one who's coming door to your business to say, how can I help you? Let me know how I and the state are able to acknowledge your business in a way of appreciation rather than insult.
You understand better than most, owning a local business, how important on so many different levels local businesses are to the fabric of the community. I'll use an example. A couple years ago, I was involved in a charity concert, and it was we were raising money for Habitat for Humanity. Now, again, Habitat for Humanity, if there isn't a feel-good story there, and it was fascinating to me in Cumberland because I went to a bunch of local businesses who gave money, offered to sell tickets on our behalf, put up posters, went to national businesses. They referred me to a PR person in a distant city who never returned a phone call. Local businesses like yours and these print shops, they sponsor Little League teams. They're the first ones to show up at a church bazaar. They're the first ones to do some printing on the cuff for a local charity. These are the people that are the fabric of our community. And you use the term insult because you're a mature adult and I'm often not. But again, all business is personal. You're a family member in a multi-generational business. It's hard to explain to folks that have never had to make payroll or never owned a business just how personally you take that. If you're awake, you're working. That's how it goes when you own a business. And so to have invested generations, as you point out so aptly, in these type of small industries where the cost of capital is enormous, the capital requirements in terms of equipment are off the charts in today's technology-driven environment, and the cost of everything from workman's comp to all the variety of all of this that legitimate businesses provide on a daily basis for their employees, whether it be healthcare, payroll, are staggering responsibilities. And for her to just step on these people like this, I can't imagine. You caught on Go Local Probs reporting today when they interviewed some local print shops. Just, you could sense the palpable anger that people are starting to feel. Yet she appears to be completely tone deaf to this.
Correct. And to the most of the time that she's been in office, I don't find her to be a very good listener. She speaks very well to the point of agenda, but your agenda should derive from those that you're supposed to be serving.
Right.
And her low approval rating, elected initially, and then at this point shows that there isn't a tremendous amount of support. And I think her agenda is to appease more support in certain areas. So she has little pet things, we'll say, to outreach and say, will this satisfy you? Will this satisfy you? I don't want to say to buy votes, but you are technically positioning yourself to build a relationship as a result of a decision to satisfy one certain framework, and that's re-election. And back to your point about Rhode Island. Rhode Islanders, while frustrated, you could speak to anybody in Rhode Island. They love Rhode Island. They do. They love everything from the noise to the excitement to the fire we're just talking about in Providence. These are successful points of enjoyment. They're frustrated. That's what they are. They're disappointed. But there's no lack of love for Rhode Island. When we're talking about big box stores, like you were talking about, they don't have a connection here. They don't feel the heartbeat of Rhode Islanders. They come in, and what they do is they take over the small business community, the patchwork, by doing what they're doing. Now, you can't eliminate them. They exist, but what we have to do is we have to support our local small business community. They're the backbone. We hear it all the time. It's not a cliche. It's a reality. The reality is that's foundationally what we have, and we have to keep that alive. And her position is technically to doctor that. She needs to keep the environment healthy. And what you're saying is it's falling on deaf ears, and I agree with you 110%. And it's frustrating to many, many folks.
Yeah, there should be a Hippocratic oath for politicians. The first, which of course is do no harm. And at this point, I believe somehow she inherited a very difficult situation, but we've regressed. I don't think we've made really any progress whatsoever. How bad do you think the deficit is going to get? I'm not going to ask you to put a number on it. Although if you want to join our death poll, you can do so anonymously. But and you know, it's my job as a talk radio / media host to try and put some sort of dark humor to it. I mean, that's what we do here. But it is a dark humor. You know, as of a week or so ago, it was, you know, the shock announcement that we were $99 million in the hole, despite it being postured to us aggressively that there was going to be a surplus to spend. Expectations, and this is my words, not yours, I'd love your reflection on it if you're willing to, but expectations were then dangled in front of select portions of her base, whether it be the college tuition or her attempt to one-up the speaker in the form of the highly regressive car tax. Those expectations were raised, then all of a sudden, as if there was a marionette player at work, we find out we're $99 million in debt. WPRI is reporting that deficit might actually be higher. How bad can this get?
I'm an optimist, but I'm a realist too. I think the $100 million figure is probably very close to being accurate. I couldn't see it be lower than that. I don't sit on finance committee. I respect tremendously the members that do. That budget comes in, they look at it, they review it, they revise it to the best of their ability. But I was always a big component and raised this way, that you don't spend money you don't have, and you don't borrow money that you can't pay back. And the continuation of, and we're a small state, for a budget this large to function, there needs to be a reality check. And that's why all of these successful thoughts, I think of it, because I'm sure we had this conversation about Mike Stenhouse. He came on, and we're under the same outlook of the sales tax,
right,
from 7%. And when we look at the other New England states, and we're always talking about who and what our neighbors are doing, and how we can be reflective of their successes and try to emulate things here in Rhode Island. Well, one of the biggest things would be the sales tax, and to drop it immediately from 7 to 3, you know, is tremendously aggressive. But we need an aggressive move. And I had the outlook, once we started talking, of doing a phase-in, maybe a 5 or 6 year phase-in. So we started looking at numbers. I mean, to do it immediately was over $550 million for that huge drop. You know, the fiscal note that we got back, tremendous amount of money to try to find. But if we dropped it down, you know, we dropped it 1.5%. That's an aggressive move that the other states would have to be competitive to us now. Instead of us saying, oh, what is our neighbor doing? What can we do to be competitive? Look at us. Look what Rhode Island's doing. Now, right now, they are looking what Rhode Island's doing. And they're sitting back, and they're very relaxed, because they know that their successes are hard for us to obtain because we have this big fat budget.
Where can they find $100 million in the space of about 45 days?
It's going to be tremendously hard. I know it's going to be.
You have to balance it, don't you?
For the most part, what you don't want to do is you don't want to make cuts in areas that are detrimental to life, in regards to health and functionality of folks here in Rhode Island. But there are fat areas that have been spent on over and over, and it carries over. And we have several members in our caucus that sit on finance that are looking at those things to be able to propose ideas, and not necessarily, you know, amendments on the floor right away. We want to do this before it happens, and that's why it's nice to have a conversation with multiple individuals on finance, and the speaker does that so that there is different ideas coming from a Republican and from a Democrat perspective on the budget. But we all live, that's our budget. So we all live from that in our districts and our individuals. So some districts require certain things where others don't. And because you have a wide spectrum of opinion, that's the understanding that the state must function, but not in a deficit. Right. And it's very frustrating when you're approaching the end of session and there's conversation that you're tremendously out of whack. So it is frustrating.
Where do you think it all went wrong? I mean, and I know that's an incredibly open-ended question, but just from a gut level for someone who's connected to it, maybe not on finance, but is you know, we're in an economy where we should be improving as a state, at least with the other states in our region who are well run are people just blowing their budgets?
I would probably have to say that if I was sitting on finance, that you would look at departments, first of all, the ones that are highly funded, tremendously funded, and not functioning up to par. But the salaries is something you have to look at, because there's a lot of hidden areas where all of a sudden, and about 4 or 5 months ago, maybe 6 months ago, I was calling it the Governor Raimondo $100,000 club.
Right.
I'm sure you remember me saying that, because any job that she hired or established, it was $100K plus benefits.
Right.
And then you'd look and you'd say, all right, what exactly is this person doing, and did this position exist before, or are we creating something new? And things of that nature had existed before. So I know members of the caucus now, of my caucus, I don't know about the other caucus, are looking at positions like that that are probably not necessary for functionality of departments. I mean, it's hard to say that cuts are not needed when you're $100 million out, you have to take a conservative perspective of spending. In order for you to get a healthy economy and state, you have to make tough decisions. And that's something else that I just don't see her doing, is she doesn't roll up her sleeves and she'll say she's rolling up her sleeves.
Yeah.
And if there's a camera there, she might roll up her sleeves. But the reality is that those folks that are suffering are not watching and seeing her words in action. We're just not seeing it, and we're seeing the results of that, as you said, down to the wire. I mean, being, heading towards June now, it's a scary thought that now you have to look for this money.
Right. Well, and what's sad is it seems like so often the brunt of these cuts are the lower income wage earners. I mean, the people who are washing the dishes, the people who are driving the delivery truck, the people who are, it's at this point, I think what we have is a middle management problem. Carl Weinstein, who's one of my political heroes in the state, because Carl voted against 38 studios, we must never ever forget that, has always talked about lean manufacturing, and his willingness, literally as almost an evangelist for the process, seems to have routinely been dismissed out of hand by successive administrations for the last 7 or 8 years. There seems to be no attempt. Their notion of modernizing government is to bring people more on to study it, as opposed to finding people who are going to achieve it. And the number and the wide range of people who are in this six-figure club, as you so aptly put it, is astonishing. And these are people, quite frankly, based on, if you're me, and I wrote a piece in this about Go Local a few weeks ago, maybe a month or so, again, this romantic notion that there is a compact between government where we pay taxes and expect a certain level of services back. And this romantic notion that because government is involved in that process, it will be done in a just, fair manner, have been proven conclusively wrong in this state, because this state's inability to function on even on a basic level on just about everything. I'm often hard-pressed to find something that this state does well as far as state government. That doesn't mean there aren't a lot of good people trying, but the direction ultimately has to come from the top.
I just want to jump in.
Sure.
He is an extremely intelligent man, and a lot of times change scares people.
Right.
And when it comes from a strong perspective of intelligence, it does show that their changes could be made and weren't made.
Mm-hmm.
The perspective should always be acknowledged, and even at the very minimum implemented as a try, because what is happening continuously is a failure to progress, and a change is needed. What the change is, it's determined by how you implement certain perspectives, let's
Mm-hmm.
say. So it's needed. It hasn't happened, as you said, for several administrations, and it's a continuation of the same thought. And in that process, you're not going to see any success because there is no change.
Mm-hmm. So let's get on to national politics.
Sure.
So your decision to run for the United States Senate, what was your
The
motivating
impetus.
factor?
I was very, first of all, as being a funeral director, and I'm going to start right from the genesis of running for state rep. Public service is something I love to do.
Mm-hmm.
In doing so, in moving into Coventry, I had been there for a couple years and was getting involved with the community, getting to know everybody, moving from Cranston to Coventry, and I happen to live out in the rural area, getting to know the school system, getting to know town politics and everything, and I decided that I wanted to run for state rep. A lot of folks in the area were frustrated with the current leadership, and I asked them why. And they said because there was a tremendous disconnect between the leadership of the seat to the individuals and their voice of concern. And I said, that's a good reason. That's a good reason for change. And I said, you know what? I'm just a normal guy who loves helping people. And in my industry, we listen.
Mm-hmm.
We're tremendously compassionate and understanding to probably one of the toughest situations anybody really could go through. And while I've never been in politics, and I'm going to be very honest with you, I don't like politics. I like public service. I think when there's too much politics, it waters down the public service, because you'll find that there's a political agenda it dominates any possibility of good public service. And I try my hardest every day to avoid the political aspect of things, because it's drama, and you don't need the drama to produce results for individuals who elect you. So I knocked on 5,000 doors, just under. I talked to a lot of folks, and I didn't sell them me. I just knocked and said, I'm me. I'm here to listen. I want to help. And it's not a Republican district. It's not an independent district. It's not a Democrat district. It's a mixture. And I found that when I went door to door unlabeled, that I was just an individual who was there, who cared, first of all. Not necessarily, they weren't looking for somebody to agree with. They just wanted somebody to listen. And me listening and being able to, I want to say, produce in a way something that hadn't been there before. A voice of reason sometimes, a good conversation of a debate. All of those things happened, but I knew I wasn't going to gain support of 100% of the district, but my ambition was to gain 100% of the respect of the district. And then later on, if I was elected, be able to earn that support by decisions that I made. Not party politics, but people politics, and serving the agenda of the people, which brings me for running for U.S. Senate. I really wanted to be able to stand back and look at our delegation and say that they are vocal for the needs of Rhode Island. And it's disappointing because I can't. And the individual who I'm choosing to run against, I would probably say is most frustrating to me. And the reason that I say that is that for the same reason I ran for state rep, is fulfilling the voice and concerns of front burner issues for Rhode Islanders. When you're in office, and I'm a huge supporter of term limits, so running for state rep, I said I was only going to run for 3 terms anyway. And this would have been my final term, and that would have been it. I would have been at the funeral home and continued my public service that way. I was very frustrated. The junior senator does represent me, and I don't feel like that my voice is being heard. So I started talking to, it began with my community, and it extended out with social media as a huge outreach from Burrillville to Westerly, many different frustrations, and I wanted to know if they felt the same way I did. What are your issues that you feel strongly about? I mean, are these the issues that are being fought for on the platform that this gentleman has been elected to do? Bobby, no. And I took a step back and I talked, you're married, I'm married, you start with the boss. Yeah. I talked with my wife and I said, Jacqueline, this is something I'm considering. And she's tremendously supportive. And then, of course, I have to leave my job. This is a full-time position, a U.S. Senate position. I had to speak to the firm, and I had to talk to the funeral home and say, my absence from, if elected, is that going to be feasible? Are we going to be able to function without me being present here? And there was a tremendous amount of discussion with that, because I'm the oldest of the 4th generation, but my father and his 2 brothers run the firm, and my brother and my cousins, we're functional pieces there. If I have to step away, and remember I said term limits, if I'm elected to the position, which would be a tremendous privilege to do that, I don't want to stay there until my hair is turned gray and all of this.
Yeah.
2 terms as a U.S. Senator. If you're not able to show a positive impact in 12 years, conversation is mute. And I'm going to be very honest with you. We're looking at voting record. We're looking at how the needle has been pushed for the middle class as a result of the delegation, and more specifically to my opponent, my junior senator. The needle hasn't moved. He's admitted to the fact that there hasn't been a great success underneath the last administration for doing that. There wasn't that fight. Rhode Islanders want a fighter. But not only do they want a fighter, they want somebody who represents them. So you can fight, but you also have to represent the voice of those that you are elected to serve. And it's a very small, easy thing to do. Foundationally, it's about listening. And it's been far too long since Rhode Islanders' voices have been heard by the junior senator. And it's very frustrating to them. And I'm going to step up and to the best of my ability to continue what I've done fighting at the General Assembly, to continue doing that in Washington. And I'm very excited about it. Many folks are very excited about it. And I don't have anything bad to say about the senator, because that's not what it's not. It's not about him or me. It's about those who are elected to serve. And I think that's where elections and politics get all the drama and the fighting and the dirty politics and this and that. Just stick with what you're going to do and what you have done. And the junior senator is campaigning for another term. I want to know, prove to me, show me what you've done in the past two, to prove to me that another term is worth that vote. And there's many people in Rhode Island, that's not going to happen for them.
So let's get into some issues.
Sure.
And the point of this conversation really is not to focus on him, so
Sure.
I appreciate your sort of the gentlemanly stance. Let's take the issues that really impact Rhode Islanders as opposed to the issues that might become a personal obsession.
Okay.
So, the most recent health care bill. This is one of those situations where no one seems to be happy.
Correct. Can I jump in on you on this?
Of course.
In regards to the healthcare, there's not many states that it does work, and Rhode Island has been stated, and Rhode Islanders have stated that it does work. Yeah. Nationally, the frustration comes to be that it doesn't. And in the states that it does work, Rhode Island is predominantly most in favor of supporting what's here and replacing the broken pieces of it, because we know that there are broken pieces of it. And to revisit that instead of replacing and repealing and everything like that, this is where I took myself out of it, and I looked at it and I said, we need to look at this prospectively and not as a party outlook, the party umbrella, or anything like that. We need to look at Rhode Islanders' vote for me to fight for them in Washington. This is a piece of legislation that affects millions and millions of people and their health care. Okay? This is a very type-sensitive piece of legislation that needs time and an organized effort in regards to hearing it and hearing perspectives. The way it existed and the way it went through the House and the way it's going into the Senate is going to come out totally different. I think that it will be changed in a way that has a better perspective of individuals throughout the states, affordability of care, possibly more competition so that the rates are more realistic. I think individuals who have ailments at this time are in tremendous consideration, those more especially those with disabilities. I think this is a very type-sensitive piece of legislation, and because it affects millions of people, it needs time and a tremendous amount of bipartisan effort in terms of creating something that's going to continue successfully for many years on an affordable, realistic, and compassionate way. And it's not going to be easy, but this is one of those things that needs time. And that's my feeling on the
How should health care be delivered in this country? Right now, because of the predicted failures of Obamacare as it was constituted, and it was predicted prior to its initial passage that single payer would be the end result of that. How do you believe health care should be delivered?
Prospectively, I would probably say that one of the failures was because of the way healthcare was delivered at the time. I think that there should be more competition. I think that, you know, out of state competition should be involved, so that it's about rates.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's one of the more bigger debates, is the affordability of.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said to you, it's multifaceted because it affects certain people. Once you're moving one decision one way, it affects on another way, and
Mm-hmm.
it has to be a fair balance of care. So I told you that piece of legislation is something that does need time.
What other issues on a federal level resonate with Rhode Islanders? What do you think the average Rhode Islander priority is in terms of what the government should or should get out of the way of doing?
My personal fight at this point in time is Veterans Affairs.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've failed tremendously to acknowledge. I don't mean we, but necessarily the congressional delegation
Mm-hmm.
could have worked a bit harder in acknowledging of our veterans' active service. Those who are active service, I've spoken to them, and I don't want to use the word a raise, but I mean from a pay perspective, in terms of their sacrifice, being away from their families for years on end, watching them grow up, and their wage that they're being paid to do what they do for our freedoms is a terrible disservice. And that needed to be acknowledged. And there were budgetary amendments that were put forth, and they were voted down. Now, to me, that is supporting your veterans, active service. The care given to those who are veterans, retirees, it needs a tremendous revisit. And I've talked to veterans most recently that are disgusted by the care that's given when they come home. And that's a huge failure to me, because the sacrifice that's being put there there's nothing that compares to that. So prospectively, on a Veterans Affairs perspective, and a stronger funding our military, it has always been important to me, because we want a strong and secure national outlook at what's going on here. That way our day-to-day life, we're not fearing terrorism or anything like that. When we have a robust budget to provide for strength in regards to military equipment and everything. And that's the first thing that is looked at for budgetary cuts, because it is a little bit expensive, but you can't put a dollar sign on national security knowing you feel secure in your home and in your country. Mm-hmm. The economy. We can talk about that on a state level and on a national scale. It needs to be looked at. We need to revisit trade. I mean, just in itself, we've lost a tremendous amount of manufacturing jobs. Mm-hmm. Let's look at it from that perspective. And we're seeing a lot of our things, our clothing, up until anything that you have a label on now. If you go to look and you see, it's very, very rare that you're seeing made in the USA. And if you do, you're damn proud you're holding that, because you know that you're fighting to keep those industries that are making this alive. But we're seeing a tremendous amount of things being manufactured and created out of our country. Mm-hmm. That obviously shows that where we stand as an economy in terms of jobs. It's extremely frustrating when we look at nationally. You know, some states are doing very well with their job percentage and things like that. But statistically, and the current administration, when we look at it over the past over 100 days, has created over 100,000 jobs in certain industries. Now, there's job creation happening, and I think it's because, and I feel strongly it's because we're making conversation about change. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm about aggressive, responsible change. And when I mean about aggressive change, we're heading in the same direction. You head in the same direction, you're going to get the same results. And that's what we're frustrated about. So if we approach it aggressively, But in terms of a responsible outlook, and the reason I say responsible is that you have to acknowledge any of the decisions that you're going to make, and you have to see what the potential pros and cons are. And I think with this administration, with the tax relief that they're looking at, and there's many different things that are coming up, that is about trade agreements. I think revisiting those things and showing that we're aggressive as a country about respecting, getting our jobs and our economy back and job creation, I think we're going to see in the first few years growth. I think the frustration comes from the fact that our president not necessarily is a politician. He's a businessman. So his approach, and I said this, his approach is as a businessman. And prior to that, we're looking at different presidents and their position prior to becoming a president. We're looking at a guy who's had ups and downs in businesses. And when he had the downs, he revisited it and became successful again. What he's looking at from a business perspective, because that's what we're going to talk about, because if you look at him from a political standpoint as a politician, that's where we're failing as a country, looking at someone who's a successful businessman and saying, why does he need more political and this and that? Well, he's 100 days in. You have to give the guy a little bit of time to say, I understand business, but now I need to understand how to make successful business, jobs, creation, and also satisfy, I don't want to say a political persona, but an individual in a prestigious office that's respected on a high level of saying, I have to do my due diligence about understanding all the facets of that part. And he's learning on the fly. The problem is, every time he's learning on the fly, someone's throwing a rock at him. And nobody is perfect. And by far, I'm a human. I make human errors. But I think time is going to be on his side in terms of you need to take the time to step away before a decision, then step back in. With business, we're seeing he's stepping right in. National security, when he did the acknowledgement to Syria and Afghanistan, there were many individuals who I talked to in the armed services that were proud. They were proud that our president took a position that long before was needed and it didn't happen before. They felt they were fighting for a country and a president who respected their sacrifice and what was going on. These are where he's stepping in and he's successful, but there are other areas. We're not going to hit the ball every time we go to bat. We know that. But if you take a step back, you acknowledge the decision. These are some of those other decisions that need a little bit more time. And maybe the time isn't given. I'm nowhere near that presidential platform of what that spectrum is. My spectrum is entirely smaller, where my decisions can be made a little bit differently. But I would say that you have to give a little bit of time to reflect before you implement. And
well, let's look at some specific issues. He's talked openly about tariffs.
yes,
As
more specifically to Mexico.
right.
Yeah.
As a free market person, I truly believe I don't see globalism as a dirty word. I see a recognition by open markets that there are advantages to doing business in places as opposed to others. Ultimately, capitalism, job formation, capital creation, business formation should take place where the market speaks to the best possible circumstances. Right now, for a variety of reasons, that's not the United States. So tax reform, to me, is first and foremost an issue. And he spoke early on about some tax reform that would stimulate the flow of money back into the United States that's being held captive by foreign corporations. Yet his current tax incarnation seems to be really a hodgepodge of goals that are geared ostensibly for the investor class, not what I'll call the production class. What's you mentioned a specific goal at the Rhode Island level, which I happen to agree with, which if there was ever a break glass, add water, instant results, it would be cutting the sales tax. what should be done first and foremost at the federal level to try and accomplish that same goal in terms of the tax system?
So I agree with you to a certain point about the free market aspect of it, but my thing is that when we're doing something like that, statistically it shows that we've lost over 500,000 manufacturing jobs and manufacturers of course, to go with that. So where is the balance in the thought process of we want a free market outlook, but yet we also want to be able to create here in our own country? So where is the balance? Where is the balance come from on a national level that trickles down?
There is none unless you remedy the situations that make us uncompetitive in the free market. I mean, ultimately, and we use the analogy with our last guest, that there was a lot of noise in Rhode Island because it's on a local issue. The Twin Rivers decided to use out-of-state companies to build their hotel. Well, if you believe in free markets, then and the best deal for them was an out-of-state company, well, they should go with the out-of-state company. Now that might not be particularly pleasant, the recognition that they didn't choose Rhode Island business, but if they chose Rhode Island businesses that were not competitive, they ultimately were doing a disservice to themselves as a business. So the question should be then, to take it one step further, what do we have to do on a national level to make this country more competitive? And one of them is finding ways to fix a broken immigration system and encourage H-1 visas and things like that as opposed to discouraging them right now. And number two, creating a tax environment where entrepreneurs will want to build here as opposed to starting using our innovative culture here in this country, and then the minute they go into the manufacturing mode, it simply makes no sense for them to build here. A business's first responsibility is to its investors, not towards the country. And this is where the progressives will hate me, but it isn't to the community, it isn't to the country, it isn't to anyone other than their owners. That's the first responsibility of a business, is to make the most money as possible and make the most competitive product and be number one on that stand, not because of artificial influences. So what do we do as a country to make us more competitive as a nation so that people will want to stay here and build here?
You brought up and I just want to go back because as you keep going, I'm trying to remember your bullet points of what you're saying. You brought up immigration from a financial standpoint,
right.
The financial, the impact and association to the two, and the tremendous amount of money that's lost as a result of illegal immigration. That's the perspective I've taken right out of the gate, and actually past administrations, the Obama administration and also the Clinton administration talked about E-Verify and creating a fair playing field for all businesses. That, I agree with you entirely, because we're looking at that more, especially here in Rhode Island, as the immigration standpoint and E-Verify not being required for all businesses. It doesn't create the fair playing field, and the survival and profitability is put in jeopardy too. And there's businesses that are lost as a result of that.
You see, as a government, I believe the government needs to, and this is where there's a huge difference, if you will, in the philosophy, say, the Republican Party and the Libertarian Party. I believe in free markets, completely free markets. I believe that business flows to that environment, that economy, that business, that industry, which is able to provide the best product at the best price. That's almost cliche, but
it does make sense, though.
Well, no,
it's not outlandish to say what you're saying.
Right, but fundamentally, at the same time, I believe, and this is again where Libertarians and Republicans differ, I believe largely in open borders. Do I believe that a country has a right to make sure that people entering the country are safe, are not engaging in illegal activity? Absolutely. But one of the problems in this country is not, I believe, that the creation of a welfare state twists the argument about immigration. Our prior guest talked eloquently about the fact that you need to eliminate as much as possible the public safety net, and in doing so, make society more competitive and more productive. Because of the enormous waste in government in providing that safety net. The percentage of money that actually gets to poor folks, whether they be here in Rhode Island with the UHIP fiasco or on a national level, is staggeringly low. There's an entire industry that exists that, there's a lot of people making a lot of good money off of poor people. So, but at the same time, open borders and open free trade and the absence of tariffs is ultimately what, after a period of adjustment, creates and rewards those who are the most competitive, the most innovative, the most efficient. And markets should be driving those efficiencies, not government interference in those markets or government interference in the workplace or government interference in day-to-day life. So it's a convoluted argument, but the country, we need to make ourselves more worthy of these jobs. We can't assume and I'm not projecting this on you, that there's a sense of entitlement to these jobs because we've got disposable income here. The argument has always been, why don't people shop more locally? Well, a lot of people do now because they understand the value of it. But if you notice, they shop locally at companies that earn their value and earn their business. And the great thing about small business countries, there's a lot of people who have managed on a small business level, to generate products that are exactly. And a perfect example is Moo.com that we've all now found out about, and I'm asking every Rhode Islander who's business cards the next week or two to either continue to go to their local shop, but don't go to this Vistaprint joint. Go to Moo.com or find a local guy on Tioga Boulevard who's doing cards. But ultimately, if the local business card manufacturer, and I'm just using them as an example because I've worked with some printing outfits in the state that are wonderful. But if the local business card manufacturer can't produce a good enough product, they're not entitled to the business. So the key issue to me as a country is what do we do to reduce the barriers to success that our government enforces on us on a day-to-day basis. And a convoluted confiscatory tax system on a federal level is clearly one of them. My first job out of college was a tax accountant, believe it or not. And the amount of energy that's placed into tax preparation and tax planning in this country is insane because our tax policy has become effectively the largest part of our economic policy. We use tax incentives to manipulate markets. And that's counterproductive, and it's wrong, and it doesn't work.
So to the point, to what you were saying about if something is created somewhere else,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't want to say better, but better is really how you said it, that should be the case, but we're seeing certain, and most specifically certain products that are created better here in the
Mm-hmm.
United States of America than, let's say, in other countries, China per se,
Mm-hmm.
where it breaks and you glue and tape it kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's more expensive for it to be created here. That's what we have to look at. We're having a successful product that lasts for years and years on end, and the competitor is creating something somewhere else that I don't want to say is junk, but it isn't of the same quality,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a better price to be made there. That's what we have to look at. Why is it so expensive for us to create a quality product here in our country?
Right.
And to acknowledge and fix that. That way we're buying a quality product here, made by jobs here, manufacturers here. I mean, there are certain things that probably can't be made here.
Well, exactly.
But for a certain extent, we need to acknowledge what you just said. But I think that you're not totally blowing my mind by your free market approach, but the open borders aspect of it is where we don't
Probably.
necessarily agree. I think.
Well, and by the way, I believe that any nation has a right to prevent, what did W used to call it, as I like to say, the evildoers. Nations have a right to their security, but we also prevent as a nation, because of our crazy immigration laws, a lot of really good people. And my problem with the Trump administration, and I'm not trying to project the Trump administration onto you, with the refugee ban, is that the analogy was constantly drawn to issues with Western European nations. We have a completely different system. Our refugee system here is probably the finest in the world. And we arbitrarily kept people out of this nation who are some of the most patriotic, liberty-craving individuals that we are, people who, you just instantly want to be part of the solution here. And also, a lot of the innovation that takes place in this country happens because a lot of folks, we are a mecca now. Everything that's good about American excellence, American innovation, is fed to a certain degree by folks from other countries who respect our system here and want to be part of it. We can't continue, as the Trump administration is doing in many cases, prevent those people. We need those people. Because quite frankly, they're a lot more productive than some of the Americans are.
Can I intervene just one
Absolutely,
second?
of course.
Just while it's fresh in my thought process, when you brought up the Trump ban, I was asked about that and what my feelings were, and I think and as you said, securing your country, your borders, and everything like that are very important, and we're both in agreement on that. I think every administration, when they begin out, should prospectively look at all of the situations that are before them, and national security is obviously something I feel very strongly about. I didn't look at it and didn't address it and didn't acknowledge it as a ban. I looked at it as a halt to perspective. And the way I looked at it was, it wouldn't be a permanent thing. It would be something for the administration to look at and say, look, we're having national security issues, more specifically and known in the fiancé visa, in regards to the student visas. When they're put out there, the students are not followed after that. Scholastically, where does it go? We got a couple situations here we need to acknowledge. We're going to halt. We're not going to ban, we're going to halt. And this is where I told you where I differ a little bit, because I think when you're time, as I said, you need to step out and you need to prospectively look at how you roll out a decision on a huge scale like this. We probably agree most indefinitely that the rollout was done terribly.
Yeah.
And prospectively, the principle of the whole, what I was saying, looking at it from a respectable standpoint of national security, is saying, okay, we have situations here, we need to halt, we need to table a lot of this, and then put out our own administration, as our own administration, our new policy, how we feel that we can tighten up the holes that have been infiltrated, and then we'll go back to day one again. And then we were able to continue that. So when it came out, first of all, the word using ban, and second of all, there were folks up in the air, there were folks in airports, and all of this. I raised my hands and I said, this was done terribly and extremely insensitively done, and took very poor perspective of what was going on, or what potentially. See, the decision of halting, that is, of everything, for an outlook, an new administrative outlook, could have been handled much better, and probably would have been received better, because there wasn't so many insensitive, uncompassionate ways of addressing certain situations. And we saw it. I mean, there were children separated from parents, and there were professors that were supposed to be here and everything, and that was what everybody focused on, not the fact that the new administration wanted to concentrate on national security. It's the fact that it was rolled out wrong. And that's where I'm sure you and I agree to maybe some extent of saying the rollout was poorly done. Probably the principle that we agree on was of a sensible standpoint.
What do you think should be done about our tax system? There's a half of it. There's fair taxes, there's flat taxes, there's value-added taxes. Have you arrived yet at a tax policy that you would like to see pursued?
I want to see something that acknowledges the middle class again, and is able to grow those who are struggling into a better standpoint. I think that the wealthy are always going to be wealthy. The rich only get richer. That's something that's on T-shirts, you say.
Yeah.
The struggle is in regards to those who are trying or not even getting by, those who are in poverty. Nobody, I feel, as if should live in poverty. I think that's extremely unfortunate, and the struggles shouldn't be what we're seeing now. It's absolutely terrible. But as I said to you about the middle class and being able to provide relief for the middle class to be established, the balance has to be less about the wealthy and more about those who are poverty-stricken and the middle class, and trying to grow stability there. So a tax relief perspective that acknowledges those two classes, because the wealthy are always going to be wealthy. I mean, that's the reality. There's no other way to say it. It's real. Mm-hmm. But the poverty-stricken individuals and families that are in tremendous struggle need assistance to get themselves a better future is really what it is. And that's the perspective I'm looking at to try to balance that. And it's not easy. You know, nationally it's not easy to look at it from that perspective, but that's a conversation I enjoy having, because immediately folks think, well, it's a new administration, it's a new tax plan, it's a relief plan. The tax relief plan that we saw that was rolled out was immediately criticized rather than critiqued in a certain way, just like the health care. We need to think about the individual, we need to think about care. Not only do we need to think about that in regards to a tax relief plan, we need to think about the individuals and not their day one, but their future, so that they're able to establish something for a future. They shouldn't have to work for day one. They should have to know that what they're working for is getting things done, paying their bills, and oh, by the way, they're able to put money away for a 401k or in a retirement. You know, you shouldn't wake up every morning thinking that the grind is just to get you by for the week. It should be you enjoy your job provides for you, you're able to provide for your family, and you need leadership that fights for that. And I mean, I was grown up to believe God gave you two hands. One is to provide for your family, the other is to provide for those in need. So you have to take the tax perspective, the healthcare perspective, and all perspectives that involve millions of individuals, and you need to evaluate what's best for their future, not day one, but their future. And it's foundationally, it's hard because there's a lot of politics involved. You know that. Yeah.
Let's look at a situation that transcends national and local levels. And of course, I'm talking about renewable energy, and of course then as a result I'm talking about Invenergy. I know it's been publicized that you've met with the folks from Keep Rhode Island Beautiful. There is a palpable sense of frustration in the community because your opponent, while espousing clean energy goals and espousing, a concern for the community, has decidedly mixed reviews in terms of his support of Invenergy, in support, I should say, of the local community imposing Invenergy. What's your thought on the Invenergy issue?
So and I made a promise to the group not to speak specifically to this because I didn't want it to turn into a politics thing, that he had a viewpoint and immediately I was going to take the opposition for support. Mm-hmm. You brought it up and I'm going to tell you exactly what I told them, is that I know how you feel about government and I feel that the government should be protecting you, not pressuring you. And this community is being pressured while they're fighting to keep something that they don't want out of their community, and they're fighting day in and day out. Their voices are not being heard. The frustration is going statewide. They're very upset, and they expected from a energy standpoint that someone who has been fighting for this on a national scale, it's in his wheelhouse, but not only is it in his wheelhouse, it's in his backyard. Mm-hmm. Just a voice of support to say, statewide, listen, this is wrong, even from a government, rather a big government pushing down on these individuals in that community. Come at it from a perspective that they know that you're there for them, even on the carcinogens, the environmental standpoint, any of those perspectives that you're fighting for, because he only fights for one issue. We see that. He is a one-issue individual. When that one issue is happening in your backyard and you turn around and you're interviewed and you turn around and say, I can't fight this fight one power plant at a time. My platform is on a national scale, and that's where I'll do it. My voice is loud and proud on that level. Not when the Rhode Islanders are expecting you to say, this is bad. This is putting up stuff in the air. I mean, I looked at pieces of information of acres and acres of land that's going to be torn down. Everything from the soil to everything. And I just came at them with an answer initially. And I said, this is about your voice, your community, and the fact that you do not want this here. All of the environmental things set aside. I am not an environmental denier, climate change denier, any of these things. And I told you, when a label comes out like that, it does a disservice to the conversation and debate. I'm a realist. Mm-hmm. I want to look at things. I want to see things. I want to be educated by what are we talking about? I'm not denying it. How can you deny factual things that you're talking about? Now, there's scientific information that needs to be taken in perspective. That's what you're doing. That's being a realist. That's being compassionate to a situation. A denier raises his hands and says, I don't need to know about rising water levels. Mm-hmm. It exists. You're seeing it. So right. Are you a realist or are you a denier? These are things. But when I sat down with that group, I left with a whole different tremendous respect for their frustration. I knew it from hearing it. I live in Coventry. I see their signs when I get to North Situate, and then it becomes abundant, the frustration. But I didn't hear their voice because I'm in Coventry. I didn't necessarily see all that. Now, in terms of energy, you asked me about it. Solar, wind, all of those things, I'm a supporter of all means of energy, okay? Affordable, clean, however you want to look at it. I don't think we should be in one wheelhouse.
Mm-hmm. Currently, that there's legislation, and we're just getting touching back a little on the state level. Mm-hmm. Currently, there's legislation to moderate the legislation that supported something called the Energy Facility Siting Board. It's fairly arcane, so I'm not going to ask you for a blanket opinion on that. What I'd love to hear from you in the near future, as this is before the state now, not quite sure where it stands in terms of the speaker's priorities, but clearly the Energy Facility Siting Board legislation, as it's in place in the state right now, is a product of a different time when the primary designation for people in Burrillville, and I'm disgusted by this term, is NIMBY. And it was designed for a time when we were blissfully ignorant about a lot of the issues that are now part of the vernacular. So I'm going to ask you to take a look at that and get back to me at some point and see if you can find it within yourself to be an advocate, to continue to be an advocate for the people in Burrillville, and to continue to be an advocate for moderating a law that essentially eliminates any local control over the destiny of a community. My response to the NIMBY argument is always, well, whose damn backyard is it? Of course it's their backyard. And in a case like Burrillville, in a case like Coventry, now in a case like Cumberland, you've got multi-generational families, businesses there that have built a community. So who has the right to control it? As a libertarian, I always believe in local control and local authority on issues. A lot of nuances in this law. Appreciate you taking a look at it. I'm not sure how much time we have left.
None.
But I do want to thank you for coming on.
No, my pleasure.
And
thank you for having me.
No, absolutely. And we'll continue the conversation. This is one of those things you can tell. How quickly did an hour go by?
Very fast. Very pleasant, though.
No, and
you're good company.
Well, and actually, one of the remarks you made, it was almost offhanded, was that the politicization of a lot of issues does no service to the conversation. It's all about conversation. Mm-hmm. Because if we can't openly discuss issues, the whole point of the coalition is to bring together people of different backgrounds, different issues, different perspectives, and have, incredibly enough, in the year 2017, despite who's the president, who isn't the president, despite all that, is to have a conversation. And that's what's critical on a local basis. So I wish you the best of luck in your campaign.
Thank you very much.
And I know we're going to talk again soon.